Boston Tea Party, famously called the most magnificent movement of all by John Adams, was a pivotal moment in American history. It was the first major act of rebellion against British authority and showcased the resolve of Americans to resist taxation and oppression. The Boston Tea Party had a profound impact, sparking a spirit of resistance among patriots in all 13 colonies. It played a crucial role in the fight for independence and ultimately paved the way for the American Revolution. But what were the key factors that led to the Boston Tea Party? Let's find out. Even though the 7 Years' War, known as the French and Indian War in the US, involved several nations, the primary players were the British and French empires. They both had big ambitions for territorial expansion across different parts of the world, but this came at a cost, with both sides suffering heavy casualties and accumulating substantial debts to finance their prolonged struggle for dominance. The battleground that mattered most was in North America, where in 1756 the British, French, and Spanish held different parts of the region. Through costly but crucial victories at Quebec and Fort Niagara, the British emerged as the winners. They gained significant chunks of land that were previously under French control in Canada and the Midwest, thanks to the Treaty of Paris in 1763. While this British victory, to some extent, reduced the immediate threat from the French and Native Americans to their 13 American colonies, the price was high. Military and naval expenses had nearly doubled Britain's national debt, reaching a staggering £133 million. As a result, the British government believed it was fair to impose higher taxes on their American colonies, given that much of the debt had been incurred in wars fought partially on the colonists' behalf. However, the colonists strongly disagreed with this taxation, which led to increased economic hardship in the US. This incident also highlights the cultural and ideological differences between the colonists and the British mainland. Back in 1765, Britain rolled out the Stamp Act, which slapped a tax on just about every piece of paper used in the American colonies. Colonists were not at all happy about this new tax, and they made sure their voices were heard, pushing the British government to eventually cancel the law a year later. However, this wasn't the end of the tax story. The famous slogan, "No taxation without representation," became the battle cry, neatly capturing the colonists' anger and frustration about being taxed without their say and without having anyone to represent them in the British Parliament. Then, in 1767 and 1768, the Townshend duties were introduced. These imposed new forms of indirect taxation on imported goods like glass, paint, paper, lead, and tea. The money collected from these taxes was used to pay the salaries of colonial governors and judges, which the colonists saw as the British trying to buy their loyalty. Naturally, these new duties didn't sit well with the colonists. They sparked outrage and became the main trigger for spontaneous and sometimes violent opposition. Propaganda, in the form of leaflets and posters, including works by Paul Revere, played a role in riling up the colonists. Riots broke out, and organized boycotts of British goods took place. In response, the British sent troops to enforce the duties, leading to a period of heightened tension and repression. Just a year after they slapped on the Townshend duties, the governor of Massachusetts had a bright idea. He urged the other 12 colonies to team up with his state and take a stand against the British. He was all about boycotting British goods. Around the same time, things got heated in Boston over a ship called Liberty, which had a bit of a smuggling reputation. Even though these events showed that the colonies weren't too pleased with British rule, they weren't seriously considering a full-blown rebellion just yet. That all changed with the infamous Boston Massacre. In March 1770, a bunch of redcoats were stationed at the Boston Customs House. They got caught up in a big crowd of angry locals who were hurling snowballs and other dangerous stuff at them. The situation got so chaotic that they opened fire after one of the soldiers got knocked down. Tragically, this resulted in 5 colonists being killed and 6 others were injured. Now you might think the Boston Massacre would kickstart a revolution, but at first it made the British government backpedal a bit. They dropped most of the Townshend duties, except for the tea tax, and acted like things were calming down. However, radical figures like Samuel Adams and Thomas Jefferson kept the revolutionary spirit alive, making sure the resentment didn't fade away. The British government didn't do a great job of making political concessions, which was a missed opportunity to prevent a rebellion. Instead, organized groups of agitators became more and more active. In 1772, there was a fiery incident when furious patriots set ablaze a British ship that was enforcing unpopular trade regulations. Around the same time, Samuel Adams got things rolling by creating committees of correspondence, basically a network of rebels, across all 13 colonies. But the big moment came in December 1773. Let's rewind a bit. In May 1773, the British Parliament passed the Tea Act. It allowed the British East India Company to sell tea to the colonies without any duties, which made it much cheaper than tea from other companies. But here's the kicker. They still slapped a tax on that tea once it got to colonial ports. This, along with the feeling that their liberties were under attack, seriously cranked up tensions. Fast forward to November and December of the same year, the first shipments of this taxed tea arrived in New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston. Most governors in these places either sent the tea back or stashed it away in a warehouse to try and calm things down. But not Thomas Hutchinson, the governor of Massachusetts. Nope, he insisted on unloading and selling the tea with the duties collected, which didn't sit well with the colonists at all. Following a meeting of the Sons of Liberty Network on the night of December 16, 1773, things got pretty wild. Samuel Adams took charge of a group of about 100 colonists, and they did something that would go down in history. They boarded 3 trade ships owned by the East India Company, the Dartmouth, Eleanor, and the Beaver, all docked at Griffin's Wharf in Boston's harbour. What they did next was pour a whopping 342 chests of British tea into the sea. That tea belonged to the East India Company, and it weighed a staggering 46 tons, worth close to $1,700,000 in today's money. This daring act made headlines fast, and while many sympathized with the colonists, not everyone was on board with it. George Washington, for instance, believed that private property was off limits, and Benjamin Franklin argued that the British East India Company should be compensated. Funny thing, though, the event we now famously call the Boston Tea Party wasn't actually known by that name at first. It only popped up in print around 1826, and it didn't become a common way of describing the event until the 1830s, maybe as a bit of satire or to downplay any violent associations. Instead of trying to calm down the rebels, the British Parliament decided to get tough in early 1774 with a bunch of restrictive, coercive acts, which the Americans famously called the Intolerable Acts. Their target was Massachusetts, and these measures had some serious consequences. The Boston Port Act was a big one. It pretty much shut down Boston's port until the East India Company got paid back for all that tea in the harbour. This move actually brought the colonies closer together and set the stage for the First Continental Congress in September 1774. During this Congress, folks like George Washington, Samuel Adams, and John Adams got together to figure out how to deal with Britain's aggression and coordinate their resistance. They came up with something called the Suffolk Resolves, which told everyone not to obey the Intolerable Acts, to boycott British imports, and to form a militia. Then, in April 1775, things got real. The first shots of the American War of Independence rang out as British troops clashed with militiamen in the battles of Lexington and Concord. The British brought in reinforcements and had a showdown at Bunker Hill in June, marking the first major battle. After that, they hunkered down in Boston, and General George Washington, who would later become a president, led an army to besiege them. On October 26, 1775, King George III had enough, and he declared that the American colonies were officially in rebellion. He even authorized the use of force against the rebels for the first time. Then, by July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress did something big. They adopted the Declaration of Independence. That's when they formally announced that the 13 American colonies were breaking away from Britain. This move allowed them to establish an official alliance with France, which eventually gave them French support and played a crucial role in their eventual victory.